I'm here.
Hi, Jack.
Good evening. Welcome to the City of Kalamazoo's Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, August 16th. I'm Jeff Chamberlain, Deputy City Manager. Tonight's meeting is being streamed live on the City of Kalamazoo's Facebook page, as well as the City of Kalamazoo's YouTube channel. You can listen in to tonight's meeting by calling area code 269-552-6425 and entering meeting ID number 952-8035-5930 when prompted. And you can also call and leave a public comment for the Committee of Whole meeting by calling area code 269-226-6573. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Mayor David Anderson.
Thank you very much, Deputy City Manager Chamberlain. I appreciate it as always. I'd like to call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order for Monday, August 16th, 2021. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody, and I look forward to our work this evening. Clerk Borling, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Cunningham,
Here in the great city of Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Hess, Commissioner Knott,
Here, Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Pradle,
Present in the city.
Commissioner Urban,
Here in Kalamazoo.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Here in Kalamazoo.
Mayor Anderson.
Here in the city of Kalamazoo. May I please have a motion to excuse Commissioner Hess?
So moved.
It's made by Commissioner Cunningham,
Support.
supported by, Commissioner Knott. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Thank you. The motion passes. Next on our agenda is communications. Are there any communications, Manager Ritzma?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Item C on our agenda is public comments. Deputy City Manager Chamberlain, do we have any public comments for our Committee of the Whole meeting?
Yes, sir, we do, and we'll go ahead with those right now.
Good evening. This is Dorothy Appleyard, resident of the city of Kalamazoo. At the latest Planning Commission meeting, developer Matt Hollander submitted a request to rezone an Alcott Street property from manufacturing 1 to residential multifamily 24. He presented conceptual drawings and a narrative for a plan for workforce housing with a separate unit for recovering addicts. But as it turns out, Mr. Hollander does not own or have control of the property, and he admits that he has neither approval nor funding for such a project, and that there are no guarantees that he will get the funding in the near future. Planning Commission voted to recommend the rezone with 1 dissenting vote. My question is, why can someone who does not control a property ask for it to be rezoned? This is important because there is an action item on the agenda tonight to purchase the property at 322 East Stockbridge. A similar project was proposed for that property, but the parcel lays in an area that frequently floods. The proposed text amendment to the NFP overlay district seems to weaken any protection it could offer. Neighbors have complained about flooding and sewer backups in that area for years without any result. These items, the rezone of the Alcott Street parcel, the NFP text amendment, and the purchase of 322 Stockbridge, seem like an extreme machination to support inappropriate development in an environmentally sensitive area. Please consider the impact these developments could have on existing families in the area. I will close with a quote from a Gazette article about the floods in Detroit. A woman who lives in the neighborhood that floods said,
Actually, Mr. Mayor, that was the end of the recording. So that's all.
Thank you.
That
So,
was the last one.
all right, thank you, Deputy City Manager Chamberlain. With no special agenda items, we are now down to review of items on upcoming City Commission agendas. Is that back to you, Deputy City Manager Chamberlain?
Yes, sir. Just a quick overview for your agenda tonight at the 7 o'clock business meeting, we have the Natural Features Protection Overlay 2 coming back to you. There are 2 public hearings, but because they are basically the same ordinance, that will be combined into a single public hearing. But then there will be separate votes on each item. On your consent agenda, you've got a number of purchasing items also, as well as an agreement with the Youth Opportunities Unlimited with their program with our Parks and Recreation Department, some new polling facility location for the clerk, as well as a permit for some telecommunications in the right of way. And then finally, on your regular agenda tonight is the bringing back to you for the consideration of the purchase of the property on East Stockbridge Avenue. So that is your meeting tonight. Our next meeting after this meeting is on Tuesday, September 7th. So it's the day after Labor Day. And at your 5 o'clock committee of the whole meeting, the intent at that evening is to bring back some additional information that the city administration and public safety are working on as a follow-up to the report that we received from the OIR group last week. And that is all, sir.
I appreciate it very much. Jim Ritzma, what is the focus for our work session this evening?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Just to remind everyone and kind of recap where we're at. Tonight's session is around the process for determining the allocation of ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan money that was announced earlier this year. So Kalamazoo will be receiving $40 million over the next 2 years, this year and next. We have until the end of 2024 to decide how to spend the money, and 2026 to actually spend the money. So we came to the commission in June, on June 7th, and just kind of laid out a lot of the information around the program and the guidelines that we knew at the time. And we promised to come back later in tonight's meeting to actually lay out a process that we think the commission can get behind to determine how those funds, the ARPA funds, are proposed to be decided on allocation. And as I said back on the 7th, I think it's important to note too, these funds, the ARPA funds, the $40 million, our resources, just like the Foundation for Excellence dollars and our general fund dollars. So we want to look at the projects themselves and the merit of the project across several dimensions, and that'll be shared this evening. And then how we fund those will follow, and whether they're ARPA eligible or FFE funded eligible, we'll determine that. So tonight's focus is actually how are we going to assess various competing or other projects that staff and others have generated. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy City Manager Laura Lamb, and her and the team will walk you through it.
Thank you, Manager Ritzma.
Thank you. Good evening. Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager. Have a couple folks joining me this evening. Steve Asenzi, our Chief Financial Officer, and Carrie Lynn Williams, our Grant Specialist. We're going to walk you through a couple of items, starting off with Steve. I'll chime in, Carrie as well, and we'll be certain to leave plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
We have the presentation slides available.
Steve, I can't hear you very well.
1 second. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have the presentation slides available? There we go. Okay, so as City Manager already covered, tonight we have a presentation to discuss the American Rescue Plan stimulus funds.
Hey, Steve, I'm going to interrupt. Maybe it's
Sure.
me, but you're still a little bit, I don't know if you can lean in a little bit. Maybe it's that huge room you're in. It's
I will do what I can. This is normally where I present from, so.
okay. That's good. All right. It's a little better.
Okay. So tonight we'll be reviewing, doing a quick overview of the stimulus funds, just to kind of remind everybody a bit of where things started from, and then we'll kind of go through our process that staff has developed in hopes to kind of reach a consensus approval with the commission tonight to move forward with this in preparation for our 2022 budget. Next slide. So starting here, City of Kalamazoo is expecting to receive 38.9 million. Which we've covered, we received the first half of that this year. They can expect to receive the second half sometime around June of 2022. Funding again must be committed by 2024, and then we have until the end of 2026 to actually spend the funds. As much as we want to be quick about getting these projects started and getting these things done in the community, we do want to be mindful and make sure that we're using this funding to its best and highest possible uses. And then just an overview from allowable uses from the federal government here is we can use it for COVID-19 response, economic stabilization, replacing lost public sector revenue, and also addressing systemic public health and economic challenges, and to cover administrative costs, which would include things like grant monitoring and reporting and other expenses associated with implementation oversight of these programs. Next slide. So as we said, the first phase of this allocation, we're hoping to complete as part of our 2022 budget process. In this process, we work through the various funding sources that the city has at its disposal. That includes here our annual operating budget, the Foundation for Excellence budget, which includes property tax stabilization, property taxes, replacement, budget stabilization, and then additional aspirational projects for the city. And now we have this new source of funds for the next 5 years of American Rescue Plan stimulus funding. Today we'll be proposing a process that will be used to evaluate each of the departmental requests that we've discussed a little bit, and rate them with how they align with selected community priorities. So, every eligible project will be ranked using a proposed process, which we'll get into in more detail here in a minute, but just to kind of highlight it. It's going to determine the project's alignment with established community priorities, its ability to produce significant community impact, and ranking factors that we'll be using will include, various community priorities, which we'll show here in just a minute, and program quality factors. Each priority and factor will be evaluated on a scale of 0 to 5 and weighted based on its level of importance. To build this, we've used a lot of lessons learned from priority-based budgeting, community surveys, and Imagine Kalamazoo 2025. Some of these projects may be eligible for more than one funding source, so it'll be staff will be working to choose the most appropriate funding source for each project, because it may be eligible for both stimulus and aspirational funding. There will be quite a bit of overlap between eligibility and those funding sources. And then we do want to say, this process will be refined as we move through. We've seen significant movement from the federal government in the past couple of months and how they've defined different program areas. It was roughly about a month ago that we received some reporting documents from the federal government. And in those documents, it provided quite a bit of clarity about our eligible uses and what we need to be tracking and paying attention to with these programs. Okay, from there, I think I'll turn it over to Deputy City Manager Laura Lamb.
Thank you. Again, Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager. Based on the recommendation from the Vice Mayor and the City Commission, we did put out a quick survey back in June to really ask community members to rank topics. The topics were pulled from our recent community survey, from City Commission priorities, from Imagine Kalamazoo plans. As you can see here, this is the result of over 1,500 responses. Top 5 that we saw were affordable housing, utility infrastructure, including both water and sewer, transportation infrastructure, includes roads and sidewalks, employment assistance, and we called out training and childcare in particular, and then safety, this desire for people to feel safe from crime and violence. This is a quick snapshot, really that complements what we presented to you earlier this summer in terms of our community survey. Next slide. So when we first talked about the stimulus funding in June, we heard from many of you how important it was that we think really transformationally, that we think about the ways in which we can use this opportunity to create impactful investments in our community. And we recognize that in order for us to be impactful, we're going to have to go to some level of prioritization. We're going to have to figure out how to focus. What we aim to do in looking at community survey results, stimulus survey results, Imagine Kalamazoo, and what we've heard from you repeatedly over the last couple of months, whether it be in retreats or at city commission meetings, we really heard loud and clear these 5 themes emerge. The idea of economic impact, of infrastructure, of housing, of youth, and safety. Now, we also heard from you in June how important it is that we continue to remain grounded in Imagine Kalamazoo 2025. I think it's important to note we keep seeing Imagine Kalamazoo as our roadmap throughout this whole stimulus process. And so although we're calling out these particular themes, you can see they're deeply rooted in our Imagine Kalamazoo strategic goals, such as economic vitality, shared prosperity, connected city, complete neighborhoods, youth development, safe community. This is just a way for us to become laser focused on the areas that we think we can be most impactful with this opportunity. I'm now going to turn it over to Carrie Lynn Williams. She's our grant specialist superstar. She's going to walk us through some additional evaluation factors that we feel are going to help us select projects for your consideration. They're going to help us be successful, eligible, and impactful.
Thank you, Laura. As Steve mentioned earlier, we actually spent a lot of time on the U.S. Treasury website looking to them for guidance as to what they'd be evaluating based on. They released most recently some of the reporting requirements, and we found out we were very on target. A lot of these things line up exactly with what they're going to be asking for data on. We also spent time looking at best practices and grant management, and then as Steve also mentioned, some of those historical budget considerations. So some of this is not going to look incredibly new to you. First and foremost, we really wanted to fund projects that are going to produce equitable outcomes. To that end, this is one of the evaluation criterias. We want to see projects that have goals to serve historically underserved or marginalized populations. We want to see projects have specific plans to ensure equitable access and address barriers that might be present and preventing some people from that access. And then we want to see projects that have outcomes designed to close gaps, reach universal levels of service, and meet the needs of everyone in our community. Second factor that we identified, and I should state these aren't in order of importance, these are just the way they ended up on the slide. The second one is use of evidence. This came directly from the U.S. Treasury as well. It's something that they want to see in projects that receive ARPA funding, either that they are utilizing evidence-based interventions or that they have developed sufficient program evaluations to produce evidence and to show that these projects truly are making change in their communities. Since this is phase 1 for us, this is the first chunk of money that's coming out of the gate, we really are emphasizing shovel readiness. We want to see projects that are able to begin implementation quickly and to make significant progress in 2022. And ideally, these projects will have already completed at least some level of community engagement, so we know that they've been vetted and truly aligned. As Laura mentioned, it's incredibly important that these projects are aligned with Imagine Kalamazoo 2025. We want to see that clear and direct alignment with those particular projects. And then if they can be named in a city plan, that shows that some vetting has been done, that they've already garnered community support, and that we're definitely completing the desires of the community. Level of impact comes directly from the U.S. Treasury as well. They're looking not only to see how broad that impact is, but how deep it is. So they want to know how many are we touching and how significant is the change that we're producing. It just reiterates the importance of having a clear evaluation plan with each of these projects. Past performance is looking specifically at our legacy projects. We want to know that they have good systems in place to track data, and then that data shows that they are producing the change they set out to produce. Financial sustainability, as we've said from day one, we have this money from 2022 through 2026, and we need to make lasting change in that amount of time. So we either want to do one-time investments that are going to make significant and long-term change, or if the programs that are reaching out to us have ongoing operations and maintenance costs, we want to know that they have a plan to support that. We don't want to have a great cadre of amazing programs produced that aren't sustainable. Last but not least, we also wanted to look at mandates. And if we have any existing or anticipated unmet external requirements, ARP funds are a great way for us to meet those, to make sure that we're bringing ourselves back into compliance and making sure that we're doing everything we need to do. We do not anticipate many projects will get any ranking in this particular category because it's our goal to comply immediately. But if there are any where we find that we aren't in compliance, that's something that would raise those to the top. So in order to kind of take this from the conceptual into the how does this look in the spreadsheet form, I'm going to walk through a few examples for you here, looking at both the community priorities and the quality factors. These are fictitious projects. One's a housing project, one's a youth project, and one is a flower planting project. And you'll see that we have included the 5 community priorities that Laura mentioned across the top. As she said, we didn't consider one more important than another, so the rating factors are equivalent for all of these. But then you would go through and you would rank these particular projects. So the housing project may create some jobs and get some points in the economy sector because somebody's got to build that housing, but they wouldn't really get anything for infrastructure, safety, or youth. They would get those full points for housing. Our youth project, again, may create jobs and may get the points for the youth category, not so much for infrastructure, safety, and housing. And then our flower planting project, while it may create some jobs, really isn't impacting any of those things that we targeted as community priorities. You can see how this starts to differentiate the projects. Now those scores get added to the scores that the projects would get for program quality factors. These are the 8 that I just ran over. I'm not going to make you listen to them again, but you can see each project would get ranked against those. We did give a little more emphasis to equitable outcomes, to financial sustainability, and then to mandates, as we mentioned, because if we are not meeting our current obligations and not in compliance, that's a really important thing that needs to be addressed. So the particular program, Steve mentioned there's a 0 to 5 scale. The project would get rated on 0 to 5 across these 8 dimensions, which would get added to the community priority score. And that would be how we would differentiate our projects. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Laura.
Thanks, Carrie. As Steve has mentioned, oh, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Are you guys hearing that?
Yes.
All right. And we'll keep going. Okay, we're okay. Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager. As Steve had mentioned, this first phase is really a strong emphasis on going through special projects that have come to us by way of the departments in ways that we attempt to continually implement Imagine Kalamazoo, and most notably aware of how we can try to address the impacts of COVID-19. We certainly recognize that there's important work that's also happening with community partners, and to be effective and to appropriately and adequately address the needs of our community, we recognize we need to keep working with those partners. Certainly you have some familiarity with the Disaster Relief Fund. This is set up certainly with our support with the Community Foundation, with United Way, working together to find a nimble way to address community needs as they come up and effectively deploy resources as quickly as possible. With that, this Disaster Relief Fund and the Community Foundation's Kalamazoo Urgent Relief Fund has been operating 2 different phases throughout the COVID pandemic. Between the 2 phases, I believe is close to deploying over $4.5 million of resources into the community, helping well over 100,000 individuals to address things like housing, basic needs, food insecurities, et cetera. Next slide. recognizing that we continue to see needs in our community. We're hearing it through our surveys. We're hearing it through our community conversations. We'd like to consider being able to continue to invest in disaster relief fund, proposing that we commit $1 million to look at how do we reinforce this infrastructure? How do we continue to help resources that can go directly through our community partners to the community to address those needs? Certainly, if there's support or some consideration by the commission, our next steps would really be able to talk with United Way and the Community Foundation to help understand how we can begin to translate the stimulus funding guidelines into this process. We want to be very mindful that compliance is going to be our utmost priority. We also don't want to implement it in such a way that it takes away the nimbleness and flexibility that has been so effective with the disaster relief fund and the community urgent community funds. I'm now going to turn it back over to Steve. He's going to cover our next steps, and then we will be opening up for questions, feedback, and additional discussion.
Okay, so stepping back in here, our next steps will include having a diverse work group of city staff review and evaluate all of the programs over the next month. They will then, the program rankings from there will go to the budget team that then works to help prepare our budget. And those approvals will continue through the fall, and then eventually reach City Commission for final approval in January of 2022. And then, just to highlight, we are not anticipating or expecting to allocate all of the funds in 2022. There's obviously nearly $40 million here, and again, we want to be mindful not to rush and overdo this too quickly as things get finalized in this first year. And so that's kind of where we are with everything right now. Unless there's any other comments from anybody, I'd like to open it up for discussion and questions.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I'd really like to thank Manager Ritzma and the city team for putting together this actually brief but very focused and I think thoughtful draft for a process. And so obviously now is our time to provide some feedback. I see Commissioner Urban.
Yeah, I'll get it started with an example that I think is pretty urgent. And we can just work through that to see how this particular project that I'm going to describe for you might fit into all the matrix of evaluations that we just learned about. And that is an idea that came from Chris Pradle, which is to provide hiring bonuses to the healthcare, not healthcare, but childcare facilities throughout Kalamazoo, so that they can be fully staffed to take in the kids that need to have daycare so their parents can work. That's kind of like a pump priming activity that needs to start very soon because school is about to begin in a few weeks. So the suggestion has been somehow to involve the United Way and to see what can be done immediately on that with perhaps reimbursement from the community, the recovery funds, in case the check can't be cut in the next 2 weeks. So I'll stop there and let Chris and anybody else talk a little bit more about why they think this is so urgent. But regardless of all of that, I think it maybe just serve as a good example to just illustrate for all of us how the evaluation process would work by going through this example.
Would you like me to respond first, or Commissioner Pradle, did you want to chime in with additional?
Sure.
Sorry, Commissioner Hess.
First I want to just say, I want to lift up that Casey Ready Fours really was the one who brought this to the commission's attention. Commissioner Hess is on one of their advisory groups. Certainly, I'm pretty plugged in with them as well. But as a young parent myself with 3 kids, this is a huge issue that I think is probably one of the most urgent issues that we're going to face as a community in the short term here, starting as early as the fall if we don't act swiftly with this particular segment. A lot of people don't realize or kind of forget that a lot of these early childhood care and daycare type centers that we have in the city of Kalamazoo are small for-profit mom and pop type operations. Many of them are nonprofits that have, board of directors and depend on full-fledged staff that's there. When the pandemic hit, a number of these organizations had to lay off or furlough individuals. And in some cases, once they were gone, they didn't make a lot to start with. And so now that a number of other companies are offering sign-on bonuses and higher wages, there's much more competition for those individuals who are part of that care before to support that work. And so it's one of those things where it's kind of like a dog chasing its tail. You need a strong staff there in order to bring on a higher census of children. And you need the census of children in order to have security to hire on a strong staff. And so providing some sort of a program similar how we provided micro enterprise funds to inject initial funding. Once they get that initial injection of funding to recruit and retain a strong group of people on their teams, they're good to go because then they have the confidence to bring on the kids. So it's not something that we would have to continue to support. It's a short-term injection. And one of the things in terms of a survey that was done nationally, 80% of respondents from child care centers reported they are experiencing a staff shortage. 50% of programs that have been impacted by staffing shortages are serving fewer children. You can see the writing on the wall. We're going to be in a crisis mode here, and it's going to impact employment in our community. It's going to prevent people from going back to work, and it's also going to put children at risk if we can't find safe options for them during the day. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban and Commissioner Pradel. And I don't want to get into the flow here and interrupt, this good conversation, but something I was thinking that might be most helpful for the staff is to start a little bit more at a 30,000 foot kind of view of what we've just been presented before we jump right into a very specific project, which I get the validity of that. I think that might answer some broader questions. A question like, there has been proposed on the timing side, for example, about incorporating this into our 2020 budget work. So it seems like in talking about a specific thing, what we're talking about maybe is timing. So if we could, I'd like to have some reflection on just what we have seen now in terms of this, the model for prioritization, some of that thinking about how we would rank things, the categories that were established, what would be our feedback to staff relative to those things? Commissioner Cunningham.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe on Carrie's slide, she spoke to past performance data. And then there was also a component that looks into the equitable piece as a determinant for individuals or whatever project we so choose. I guess two questions. So with the past performance data, is that something based on, is that a part of the application process? Is that something just based upon the projects we've already had in place or projects that we intend on funding? And I guess I'll include my second question before I allow you guys to answer is, the reason why I inquire is because in a lot of African-American nonprofit organizations, data is a luxury. And so when we talk about equitable, I just want to make sure that it is a part of our process to understand that data may be lacking, data may be delayed, or data may not be there at all together. So can you provide some more insight on the expectation there?
I can start. This is Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager. I can start broadly, and then certainly Carrie can chime in a little bit more about the program quality areas. one of the things to think about for this first phase is, as a part of our kind of incorporating into the 2022 budget process, is really an emphasis on city projects and recognizing part of what's being suggested with the notion of supporting the disaster relief fund is that we have an ability to support community efforts in a way that is accustomed to urgently deploying funds where they're most needed, and in a way that has certainly recognized some of the limitations that you just called out. So I think as we talk about this process that we went through in terms of the priority areas and in terms of the program quality areas, for this first go around, primarily we're talking about past performance of city projects. And certainly I can acknowledge the work that Dorla is doing in her director role of DEI of helping us build our demographic muscles and data muscles a little bit. I'll pause there and see if Carrie wants to chime in anything more on the past performance, or certainly Dorla, if you want to chime in at all about some of the work we're doing to start building up the demographic data that we know that we need.
The only thing that I would really like to add to this is our initial request from the departments for projects to be identified was done back in May. And our process has changed greatly since then as we've become aware of the ARPA opportunity and the ARPA requirements and these particular factors. So I know we're planning on going back to each of the departments and having conversations not only about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but about data and about outcomes, and trying to give them the opportunity to tell us their story more, but then also flesh that out whenever possible so that going forward, these structures are built in. So it's a good opportunity for us as a city as well to kind of build our strength in these areas. And I appreciate your comments, Eric.
I don't know if this will be awkward or not, and I'm David Anderson here, or if we need to do it. But one thing I want to make sure is that the city team brought to us, there are some priority areas, and then brought to us a proposal for a ranking process. Now, obviously, we have to be totally transparent about this. We want to make sure that we have a ranking process that is obvious to people and results in the kinds of outcomes we want. So are we comfortable, with what has been suggested to us from our city team in terms of were those priority areas, are we comfortable that they were captured adequately? And the idea of having a ranking process, are we comfortable with that? And comfortable with our city team obviously deploying that ranking process. So I'm wanting to push us back up a little bit so it feels like to the city team, and correct me team if I'm wrong on this, but that it would be helpful to have some real higher level feedback on this. And then as we begin, to think about particular issues with it, like history, Commissioner Cunningham, or data, or a small emerging organization or a large one, how that gets incorporated in. I saw Commissioner Cunningham's hand first and then Commissioner Urban.
So I don't oppose any of the language that's been used so far, any of the and I can't off the top of my head think of, I'm a processor, so I would have to look deeper into that information that was provided to us to say, I want to pick apart something in this place and space. But I guess another question going back into that, based on your statement, Mayor Anderson, is who exactly will be doing the reviewing and ranking of the project? Do we have that decided on?
DCM Lamb, are you
I think Steve is going to jump in and I'll follow up with.
Yep.
All right.
I can step in here. So we've selected a representative from our HR department, our diversity, equity, inclusion department, our city manager's office, and our management services department. And each one of those was selected largely for an area of expertise that they bring to this. Our city manager's office obviously is very in tune and in touch with everything going on in our community and would be able to provide great insight there. Diversity, equity, inclusion obviously would provide a great amount of insight towards making sure that these programs are equitable and include, everything that goes with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Management services is very attuned to the budget and the budget process and being able to make sure that we're aligning properly our resources with our projects. And then HR is also very in tune with what's going on in each of our departments and levels of staffing and other, in our unions as well. So that was the large reasons why each one of those members were selected for this.
That answer your question, Commissioner Cunningham? Thank you. Commissioner Urban?
Yes, well, a big factor that wasn't included in all the criteria that were presented is urgency. I suggest that the evaluation of urgency also be applied to the various projects that are being contemplated, because clearly we don't want to miss the boat on ones that need to be funded first if they're to be fully effective. So I want to be sure that that's noted.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Pradel?
I wanted to give my colleagues who haven't spoken a chance to speak. So, I mean, if there's anybody else, jump ahead.
Not seen any hands, but yeah.
But yeah, I apologize. Commissioner Urban kind of got that out ahead. And so I apologize that I wanted to support his remarks. But I think generally speaking, I think, kudos to the team. In my personal assessment, I think you hit the top 5 priorities on the head. We have youth as a priority, which is, I think, a pretty important issue for us. And I think it's hard to argue that more than any segment of the population that's been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, youth have been hit hard, and they'll continue to be hit hard if we don't respond in a big way as a community. And, as you've heard a number of us talk about, the best way to thwart gun violence and, public safety issues that will creep up, in years and generations to come is to support a strong youth in our community and start now and lifting them up in positive ways. And they're going to need that. I think we all know, we have made housing a preeminent priority, so that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad to see safety on there, but especially from a lens of gun violence and gun violence prevention measures. I would just, I also think, just especially coming off the heels of that business development plan that we heard at proposals for the 2022 budget, I think this is a great way to go big into those initiatives. We heard that presentation at one of our recent COW meetings. And then I'll lastly just say as well, I think it's important that we're pretty thoughtful about infrastructure. We know that the federal infrastructure plan is still, there's potential that significant funding could come down. I mean, over $1 trillion potentially. And I would imagine that will come to us in significant ways. The other thing as well is that, there's significant state funding options available that can be tied into these. And so I would hate to tie our arms with issues that potentially we could receive significant funding down the road. And then I would encourage us to be thoughtful about working with other jurisdictions and municipalities here in the area, whether it be the county or the township, to maybe, if it is working on youth initiatives and we create a fund with United Way or the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, to be a model for them and be a leader in the region and say, hey, folks, give to this fund that we've created to support our youth and in organizations that are supporting youth-led initiatives. And then, I just wanted to say, I think it's great as well that there was such a strong response from our survey. I don't know if you have an actual count of how many responses we ultimately had, but I know it was significant, and I thank the community for reaching out and using them as a guidepost for what matters to them. So,
thank you, Commissioner Pradel. Other thoughts or comments from commissioners who haven't spoken yet? Commissioner Hess.
I'm just going to echo everything that Chris lifted up about early education and early childhood development. But I also think that we should partner and work closely with the county and county leaders in with all of our topics here. Especially safety. In terms of KC Ready Fours and youth education, yes, recruitment and retention bonuses, but like in terms of safety, we need to shore up and make sure our juvenile home and folks that are serving those who are in need of juvenile services, they also need recruitment and retention. I believe that's county, but let's work with the county and say what we need. So yeah, thank you, Chris. Agree with you on everything you've said, and thank you, Commissioner Urban, for bringing that up.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. Commissioner Urban?
Yeah, unless someone else, I'm presuming you noticed someone else who wanted to talk before me again.
Yes.
As I would say that another area that's pretty urgent is we know, or we can expect, that the moratorium on evictions is going to end pretty soon. It could end in the middle of winter. So already we have a homeless population that is pretty large and being housed in an inadequate way right now on Hotop and probably elsewhere around. So whatever funds that can be freed to deal with, especially cold weather emergencies, that will certainly fall to the city to assist in, along with the rest of the county. That's a disaster relief kind of thing that is definitely in the city's bailiwick, as opposed to long-term housing supplies. That's clearly going to be addressed through the normal evaluation process. But I'm thinking that we are another winter is looming. That's, I guess, my main my short alert to all of you.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Other questions or concerns or thoughts from commissioners at this point? I don't see anyone at this time. So this is a bit of a reiteration here, I guess, but I would just like to say, from my perspective, I think this is a really great start on this work. I think it's a very helpful way for me that you laid it out, describing our priority areas those have been reinforced and supported by our work that we've had in special work sessions here at the commission, survey work, IK 25, all those things coming together. I think that's very, very important, community input driven. And I really appreciate this idea about, an evaluation team and a way to evaluate projects. So I think that's a great start. Here, if I wanted to say anything that has crossed my mind or what I'm hearing, it does seem like there might be a question or two about timing. Is there something that we want to try to get out the door in this budget year and not next budget year? And that's just a question. But are there things in that category, and do we want to think about how we address that? Another thing I've heard come up is that, do we care about specific kinds of projects? We've got our grid and we've got our various areas of interest, but is there something that we're very specifically oriented at a more granular level? Is that childcare, or is that gun violence, or something along those lines? So I don't know if there's any opportunity to think about that. Do we want to prioritize related to urgency or whatever it is, some things in a more granular category like that? And perhaps, the proposed $1 million contribution to the disaster relief fund, maybe that's getting to that, actually, in terms of being able to move more quickly and get to things like that. Along the category of just the general thinking about how we might, distribute it, and I don't want to make our evaluation overly complicated, but there's an opportunity for us to think about, for example, kind of a faith-based category, taking advantage of the church infrastructure, human and buildings and programs that might be going on. Is that something we want to think about augmenting and helping in any way? I know these cannot be faith forward initiatives in terms of promoting a specific religion, but is there an opportunity to take advantage of that infrastructure in any way? Another thing I thought about, and I think this gets to Commissioner Cunningham's thoughts a little bit, is this idea of supporting, a kind of emerging or grassroots kind of nonprofits in terms of getting into their work. And I can think of some that have been around for a while doing this, and actually some very new smaller grassroots projects that have just recently been funded, the Fatherhood Initiative, among other things, that could address some things related, back to our bigger desires in terms of safe neighborhoods and youth and that kind of thing. So anyway, just some kind of random thinking for the good of the order on that. But that all said, is there anyone who'd like to, I don't know, Deputy City Manager Lamb? I'm sorry, Commissioner Cunningham.
About that, you made me think of another question. Thank you, Mayor Anderson. This is Commissioner Cunningham. To city staff, you mentioned that there were different departments that submitted, potential things, projects. Will those dollars be split up by departments, or will it just be based on project ranking? How do you expect that process to roll out?
I can start, Deputy City Manager Laura Lamb. So as part of our annual process, we will do a call out to departments asking them for their special requests, anything that is above and beyond the standard budget, whether it be operating, whether it be capital. Certainly with each year, we're asking for Imagine Kalamazoo alignment. How do we make sure we're fulfilling our commitment to the community? So we started that process as we were still trying to get more clear on the stimulus funding guidelines. And what we're proposing tonight is we take that first batch of projects that are coming to us as part of our annual cycle, and we prioritize these projects based on the community priorities and the program quality areas. Part of what I think we're getting at from the conversation here is we know, and we've all heard the expression, building the plane as we're flying it. We have an existing pipeline of ideas coming to us. We want to make sure we've got the right goal areas that represent the commission and the community. We've got the right quality areas that make sure we're identifying projects that can be successful and impactful. As we're talking about other areas, maybe perhaps the sphere of influence for the city, part of the emphasis of considering relying on disaster relief fund and the Kalamazoo Urgent Relief Fund is that you have a system that is currently deployed to deal with urgency, to deal with a dynamic situation, to prioritize housing, safety, in particular, to look at representing populations that have been underserved, that have the greatest barriers, so that we have the ability to both take the projects that are in our pipeline and think about how we can more urgently deploy resources to meet the basic needs our community is facing right now, using community partners that have already figured out a way to kind of do that system.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Cunningham?
I'm just restate it and you can say yes or no. So it's just, based on the project, not based on department.
Correct. So forgive me, I gave you a long-winded answer. I could have just been 2 thumbs up.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pradel.
Yeah, I just had 2 quick questions, just to clarify as well. So out of that $38.9 million of ARP funding, if I recall back to our initial June presentation, I believe you mentioned that I think it was about $7 million would be needed of that funds to just fill gaps caused by budgetary impacts of the pandemic. Is that still a good estimate? And effectively that means that we're actually working with about $31 million or so.
So yeah, I can grab that. Steve Vicenzi, City CFO. I think that estimate's still pretty accurate. It is something we have to do on a year-by-year basis as part of the reporting. But as best we know right now, that'd still be a pretty fair assessment.
And then the second question is, I remember you saying that effectively we get half of the fund. We've received half of the funds here in 2021. We would receive the second half in 2022. Would that impact, the actual timing of program delivery as well?
It's totally possible. However, I honestly don't foresee that as being in the way of getting programs started. If we got extremely ambitious, it definitely could be, but just knowing the timing, the planning, how we have to do things, it's not likely to overly affect our ability to roll these projects out. And if it does, then that's where we'll work to coordinate and ensure that we're doing the most urgent and timely ones first.
Other questions for city team here? Commissioner Hess.
So when are we going to begin doing this? When is a start date?
So I can take that.
Sure.
Okay. We would start ranking these programs, assuming we come to, it sounds like we're coming pretty good to a consensus tonight on the program quality factors and getting some other additional input here. We could start this work as soon as the next couple weeks here, because we do want to align this with our budget timeline. So ideally, we would have these projects ranked by the end of September.
What I can add in, Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager, is if there's interest in us pursuing the possibility of supporting Disaster Relief Fund, next steps on that would really be how we figure out how we need to translate the guidelines of, into the Disaster Relief Fund. And I think the question is, we know there's compliance. Does it stay with us? Does it move over? Carrie and team and Steve have done an amazing job trying to pour through the guidelines to understand how to work as nimbly around them as possible. So I think where we're certainly trying to articulate for the city projects, trying to go through along the budget process. If we were to look at supporting Disaster Relief Fund, that could be on a different timeline. We want to make sure that we get the compliance right before we leap too fast. But I think that could be potentially sped up. Next steps would look like us likely coming back with an update on how we're proposing to work through compliance, and then a potential timeline for how we might look to support the effort and transfer funding over with commission approval.
Commissioner Urban.
That sounds like it would work well with the projects that we have mentioned and others that may come up that seem to be urgent. That seems to be the approach that's likely to be most effective. Wouldn't you say?
This is Laura Lamb. Absolutely. In fact, most of the projects that have come up in the spirit of community partnership are projects that the Disaster Relief Fund has already supported. So for example, Casey Ready Fours and looking at bonuses or retention or supports for childcare workers is something, as I understand it, that the United Way through the Disaster Relief Fund has already supported and is set up to support. Emergency housing is something that the city through the Foundation for Excellence supported the Disaster Relief Fund to help find emergency housing and provide assistance, basic needs. So much of what we're talking about in the category of urgent, a need that's urgent, and ability to deploy funds quickly is why we are really strongly considering the notion of supporting the Disaster Relief Fund.
Okay, I guess the third one is violence prevention and getting guns off the street and all that kind of thing. That's the one that probably would be a new one. It hasn't, as far as I'm aware, has not really gotten very far off the ground yet.
So this is Laura Lamb again. In fact, they actually have called that out in terms of the Disaster Relief Fund. Support for families impacted by gun violence was absolutely one of their first areas of emphasis in phase one. And it also made it into a shorter list of phase two. So phase two, the priorities were access to food, safe quality housing, access to healthcare, education, and supporting families and victims impacted by gun violence. So we are seeing a lot of similarities between what we're calling out as community priorities and the manner in which we're seeing the funds being deployed to community partners to get to our communities in need.
Good, good.
Manager Ritzma.
Thank you, Mayor. And not to put anyone on the spot, Laura, but you talked about the Disaster Relief Fund and the requirements or the guidelines translating over to United Way or the Community Foundation. Is that something we can do in short order? So we could bring something perhaps like the September 7th meeting, at least the allocation of, if we're settled on $1 million, so we don't delay the approval of that. Could we get other things in place to actually begin that and get that underway the September 7th meeting?
We could certainly try to make that a goal. What I would say is we could commit to coming back with either the proposal or a very strong update of how we're this close to the proposal. I think there's been some great ideas depending on how we characterize here. The needle we're going to try to thread is how not to ruin a process that is really nimble at getting dollars out the door, and to make sure that we protect our dollars. So my instinct is to say, yes, we will shoot for that as a goal, with the understanding we will work as hard as we can. And if we're not all the way there, we will give you a very detailed update and provide you with a time specific for when we intend to come back. The expectation would be if we don't hit the 7th, we would look to hit the second meeting in September, if the commission would be willing to consider that.
Thank you.
Other questions or concerns at this moment from commissioners? Commissioner Pradel.
Yeah, just one question for you, Laura. Do you know off the top of your head how many survey respondents there were, or responses there were to the survey that went out?
Yes, this is Laura Lamb, Deputy City Manager. So we had a little over 1,500 responses within the 30 days. Primarily, most of those were online. We did do paper distribution, only had about 5 of those come back. But on the whole, we had 1,500. Roughly, we had about 300 that indicated they didn't live in the city or declined to answer. The remaining would be within the city. What we're planning on doing is putting the results of the report up online so people can kind of pour through both the responses and then the demographics.
Thank you, DCM Lamb.
Mr. Mayor, this is Deputy City Manager Jeff Chamberlain. Vice Mayor Griffin was having some internet problems earlier tonight. And I saw at one point she had her virtual hand raised. So
Oh, okay.
I believe she may.
I'm sorry. I don't see you, Vice Mayor Griffin, but.
Thank you. This is Vice Mayor Griffin. Thank you, Mayor Anderson, and thank you, Deputy City Manager Chan.
Vice Mayor Griffin, we are mostly not hearing you.
I mean, she's still connected, sir, but I don't think we're getting any audio anymore.
Okay, well, we got some time here. Is a phone connection acceptable for our participation here?
Yeah, I would think that would be okay.
Okay.
She's able to get through and saying that she did not have any additional comments right now, but because
okay, appreciate it, Vice Mayor Griffin. Sorry you're having some connection problems there. So 2 things. I do think there were some important things mentioned tonight in our discussion. Just I wanted to reinforce those, is that obviously we're going to have the possible allocation of some state ARPA funding our way. We have a large partner in our community, the county, that's getting more ARPA funds than we are. And so I'm hoping that, and I know the county is going through a few changes there in terms of administration and going to an interim model, but I'm hoping that we're able to have some conversations that feel productive in terms of trying to be on the same page to some extent. It's certainly important to recognize that we will begin getting guidance as far as this infrastructure funding that may be coming our way. But I also did want to say that I really appreciate that we are now getting a little more guidance from the Treasury Department. I want to remind people that the initial document from the Department of Treasury is 31 CFR, that stands for the Code of Federal Regulations, 31 CFR Part 35. That was the 150-page initial document that described these funds. And I'm glad to hear that we're getting more specific guidance, because that was a very, very general kind of a document. So that should help us a great deal. And obviously, we have to pay a very, very good attention to that guidance, because we don't want to be dealing with issues of questions about whether the money is being spent in a way that is consistent, with what is intended. So that's obviously another very important thing. But I want to another question of DCM Lamb and the city team that's putting this together. Are there specific questions you have for us tonight that you don't feel are clearly answered, or you want to follow up on just before we close out this work session?
This is Laura, Deputy City Manager. From my standpoint, you all weighing in on the community priorities. It feels like we're fairly calibrated on that, recognizing everyone should have some time to digest and think it through. And certainly sounds like there's some good feedback on the program quality areas. I'm also hearing what sounds to be support to proceed with imagining what disaster relief partnership would look like in terms of compliance, with the goal of coming back September 7th meeting, potentially for a recommendation for commission consideration. So with that, I think I'm good. I want to just reiterate that for those that are be thinking about this tonight, tomorrow, please feel free to reach out and contact myself or the team if you've got questions, comments. We can't stress enough how much this is going to be an iterative process. We want to make sure that we get it right, but that we're also prepared to adjust along the way to make sure that we're learning from it and we're getting the most out of it.
Thank you very much, Deputy City Manager Lamb. I presume that the Commissioner Hess.
Just really quickly, I really want to thank the team, and you're often behind the scenes, but I really want to thank you for the really diligent work you've done on all of this. And I want our community to know the kind of people and the kind of care that you're taking in this process. And that's really important. So gratitude from me, and I'm going to assume the rest of my commissioners, for all of your work on this project. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. I support that. I presume that at this point, this Manager Ritsma, is there anything else for the presentation?
No, I just want to thank the commission for some great input, and we'll take that to heart. I also want to thank the great team we have here, Deputy City Manager Lamb, Grant Specialist Terry Williams, CFO Steve Vicenzi, and Dorla Bonner, our Director of Equity Inclusion, or Director of Equity Inclusion, for offering up what parts of the equitableness that we need to take into consideration in these considerations. So appreciate all of them.
Thank you, Manager Ritsma. We are now down to commissioner comments. Are there any comments from commissioners for the Committee of the Whole? Commissioner Urban.
Yes, I was wanting to hear from the city manager what his plan is for explaining to the public the progress that is being made or that has been made, will be made on the 40 recommendations and the ones that are in process, the milestones for completion of them, and the specific work products that we are to expect from each of those. I think that we need to do some overkill in terms of public communication on this, because I know some of it has been done already, but the public doesn't know that. You know, some of the policies have been already changed, but the public doesn't know that, and that's just it's unacceptable. So I would like to hear from the city manager on that, and I'd invite the rest of us to chime in as needed.
Mayor, would you like me to address that now, or I was planning on doing so at the regular meeting?
Is that acceptable to you, Commissioner Urban?
Well, it's not just me, it's the others. If the others can wait till the end of the next meeting, that's fine. But if we want to have input in shaping what the city manager is to say at 7, now's our time to get our oar in. He has 2 hours advance notice, which is better than no hours. And I'm sure he appreciates that.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Any other commissioner comments for our Committee of the Whole meeting? Commissioner Pradel.
Yeah, is there some way that we can make sure that Vice Mayor Griffin's input is still collected and somehow broadcast, or is there any way to carve out some portion of the agenda for the business meeting tonight so that she still gets an opportunity to chime in. I know she was attempting to, and I just want to make sure that that's not lost and that the public still gets a chance to hear from her as well.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Even if you have to record it and play it back.
Yeah, I would, Commissioner, I think we could, an appropriate place to do that would be under her commission comments, if she wants to add anything to this discussion. And I'll make sure she's aware of that.
Thank you. This is Commissioner Chris again. The only other thing I was just going to say is I really want to applaud the city team, just for putting this thought into this. I know that's not easy. There's, it's kind of like that I described during my team during the day is it's like we've got two parallel lanes that we're driving in, right? We're just doing the day-to-day work of doing what it takes to run a city, but we have this once in a lifetime game-changing opportunity to really think big and do something. And so we don't want to fail at that opportunity. And so, I think you guys really, definitely met or exceeded my expectations in terms of what we're hearing in terms of encapsulating prioritization, picking those top segments to work on and focus on that still aligns to our Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 plan. So thank you guys for your work on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Pradel. Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Hess?
Yeah, who knew when we put IK 2025 together that we would be able to use it to actually carve out a response to a pandemic, and that it will shape and grow how we spend this money. Heard a great quote today. All the easy problems have been used up. I don't think there's going to be any easy problems that we're going to face from here on in. And I think that as we do it together, as we do it with the care and compassion that we've been doing it so far, our community will be well served. So that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. Any other comments for the committee of the whole? Not seeing anyone right now. So I want to thank everyone who participated in either providing a comment or attending this meeting. Remind everyone that our business meeting starts at 7 o'clock tonight. We have a full agenda items and hope you will engage with us at that time. So we look forward to it and we'll see you in about 45 minutes. We are adjourned.